So I'll start by saying it's lovely to actually be here in person. Last time I was here, I had to send a recorded version of myself, and that was weird on all sorts of levels. So I hope that was okay for those of you who did participate in that session. And I hope that today gives an opportunity for you to do any follow-up questions on that or on the fabulous conversation, which Teresa and I are hopefully going to be having today. So as Michelle said, we decided to take a slightly different angle on this one. I've come here and talked at you guys a lot before, and there's only so much of my crazy American accent that anybody can stand at any one time. Oh God, now I'm really big on my screen and that's scary for me, but that's all right. I'm just going to have a moment. Teresa, you see how you cope when it's your turn. But we thought today what we would do is actually have a conversation where we really bring lived experience into understanding ADHD. There were lots of questions in the last session that we did talking about with your experiences of supporting young people in schools. Many of them had ADHD or a diagnosis of autism, and you were thinking about that. And I just thought, you've heard my kind of, I guess, clinical perspective on that. It's a totally different thing to actually just have a chat with someone who has lived that journey. And so really thanking my friend and colleague, Teresa, who is happy to come and just have a conversation about what her experience and journey has been. So I might just start by giving an opportunity for Teresa to introduce herself and just tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do now, and kind of set the scene, ease into the space.
Thank you, Kat, and thanks for inviting me along. It's a great opportunity. And I should just say that, my ADHD journey is still relatively, although, it's obviously a condition I've lived with my whole life in terms of my learning to understand it is still relatively new. And this is actually the first time that I will have spoken to a large group about it. So I'm excited, but I'm also a little nervous. Yeah, so my name's Teresa. I'm based in South Australia, and I can see some of my fellow South Australian crew in a room in the office, I believe. So I live on beautiful Ghana country, surrounded by koalas and trees and all sorts of wonderful things. I've been with Life Without Barriers for almost 6 years, and mostly in the practice and quality team in DMH, but have recently moved over into a project officer role, working on building some foundational systems for our mental health services, which is something that I've been quite passionate about for quite a long time. So it's an exciting opportunity for me. Um, and I just also wanted to just take a minute to acknowledge the lived experience in the room. There's 91 people now in the room, and, there's a very good chance that there are a number of people here in the room who either are living with, some sort of neurodevelopmental condition or are supporting family, friends, children, others with that. So my experience is my experience. And I just really want to acknowledge that we all bring our own experience into the space. And, obviously, we hear things from our own experience as well. So I just want to be really clear that, yeah, that's it, it's, what I'm talking about is only my experience. So.
No, that's great. Thanks, Teresa. And I think, if this triggers something for anybody else in the room that you want to then either share as we're going along or share at the end when we pause for questions. And that's great. We do want to really create an open space. I'm really encouraging people asking questions. That's how we learn, right? The whole idea is how we learn, and we reflect on what people share and say and what it might mean for us and for the people that we support. So you've said that, you're still early on the journey. When did you first start to wonder if ADHD might be part of your journey?
Um, Interestingly, I actually first started to wonder, well, it was actually suggested to me by someone else that maybe autism was a part of my journey, much longer ago than thinking about ADHD. So I had a now ex-sister-in-law who was speaking to me about some of her frustrations with my brother,
Yeah.
and reflected that she thought that perhaps he was autistic. And I responded to her that, so many of the things that she had described that he was doing. Some of his traits were things that I also do. Um, and she said to me at that point, "Well, you're probably autistic as well." And
Yep,
I was really curious
very
about that,
helpful.
because those traits absolutely did describe me. And so I went, as you do, onto Google and Googled test for autism, and I actually scored really quite highly on the test, but only in very certain parts of that. There were absolutely things within, the sort of spectrum of autistic traits that I didn't relate to at all. I've always been very kind of social and able to navigate those spaces really easily. So I just kind of put that aside and didn't think about it really significantly anymore. And then actually, it was just a few years ago, probably around 4 years ago, when I was in a relationship and co-parenting a small boy who was autistic. And during the process, or during that relationship, we were supporting him to have a diagnosis for ADHD as well. So, and during that process, that was when I first started going, hmm. There was a
Yep.
lot in that space that I related to in terms of the assessment that he was going through, and there was a lot in the dynamic between he and I. He was just a 5-year-old child, but we had a very particular dynamic where it was clear that there was something more going on than just you know me managing sort of some of his traits. So and then I had an opportunity to meet somebody, an adult with ADHD, an adult woman with ADHD, who described a lot of her struggles and traits, and that's when the light bulb really went off. And I pulled out my old primary school reports, which my mother had given me many, many years ago, and I'd not bothered to look at. And it was fairly clear at that point,
Yeah.
in hindsight. And I'm sure anybody, if there are any teachers in the room, they would read those report cards and be going, "Yep, that's a big old tick right there."
Yep. You hit all the boxes as you were going along. Can't sit
So yeah,
still,
so I was
talks too
really
much.
so I'm 53. I was actually only diagnosed 2 years ago, so very late
Yeah.
diagnosis. So I'm still on that journey. There's still a lot of things I'm learning, a lot of things I'm unpacking. So, it is, but I have done a fair bit of that work over the last couple of years. So,
Yeah. The advantage of having that older brain that can bring
mm,
in to do the real reflection on what it
yeah.
actually means. So, what are some moments or memories that now when you look back, you go, oh yeah, that was actually really shaped by my ADHD. That was really playing out there for me.
Mm. I think the really kind of significant thing for me is noticing the different person I was as a child when I was in situations where I was able to just be myself, and
Yeah.
situations where I wasn't able to just be myself. So I grew up in a really quite an ADHD friendly environment, really. Like, it was a rural town, it was the 70s and 80s. You could get on your bike and go places, and no one really cared. Well, they did care, but we just had a lot of freedom. There was lots of
Mm.
exploration. I could meet my needs for constantly discovering things and doing new things. But then the flip side of that was when I then was placed in situations where I had to actually do things like sit still, be quiet, start tasks, finish tasks, do things neatly, well. Um, that's when I really noticed, the struggles, and I started to do things, or people started to reflect that I was untidy, that I would never shut up, that I would never sit still, that I was fidgeting constantly, um, and so for me, those are the things really, like all of those bits where I was getting feedback from others. Like, I didn't think that anything I was doing was a problem. But I was being told by other people constantly that what I was doing was a problem. Like, you need to stop picking at your skin, you need to stop, fidgeting with your pencils, you need to stop talking to other people, you need to be more careful, you need to stop breaking things. So
Yeah. Yeah.
they were the things that really kind of, for me, are my memory as just at other people's reflections.
The way they perceived you and things like that. That
Yeah,
must have had a huge
absolutely.
impact on how you perceived yourself as a young person.
100%. And like and that obviously continues into adulthood, but you
Yeah,
know, the knowing that you're supposed to do something in a particular way and being wanting to do something in a particular way because you want to actually meet other people's expectations, because as a child so much of your personality is shaped by other people's perceptions of you and how they, reflect to you, but
yeah,
just actually not being able to do that, like being physically, mentally, emotionally unable to do the things that you really actually want to be able to do to meet
yeah.
other people's expectations. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And I can
And that gets
imagine.
very internalized as well. So
Yeah, yeah. So that story that those children and like yourself and other children will build for themselves and how that then shapes how they engage, but right the way over the course of their lifetime. It's really important for us to be thinking about that. And I
absolutely.
also imagine, we've heard people talk about masking quite a lot, that as someone who is as self-aware as you are, and as a child picking up on all these things, you're like, oh, it's not so good when I do the fiddly thing. They don't really want me doing that. That you probably developed a whole lot of skills to mask that or to cover that. So can you share
Yeah.
some experience
Yeah,
about that, what that's
absolutely.
like to be masking, as a
And
child
I
or
think,
now as an adult?
yeah, I think for me, I didn't so much as develop masking skills to be able to not do the things that I was doing, but I developed the skills to balance those out with other things that were the things that people liked. So I realized very quickly that if adults liked you and you met certain requirements or certain things or expectations outside of those other things, that you could actually probably get away with quite a bit more. Like they would
That's
just,
very strategic.
put those other things aside and go, look, yeah, she's boisterous and she'll do this and she'll do that, but she's kind and she is always the first to put her hand up when someone needs to run an errand. And so that's what I did. I learned how to make adults like me, how to please adults. So it's very much that people pleasing um,
Yeah.
trait. And that has stayed with me, my whole life. And it has advantages and disadvantages, absolutely. um, but so things that I would do apart from, those that I've just listed is, and I mentioned this to Kat when we were chatting the other day, as an older young person, I started to realize that you could trick people into thinking that you're paying attention if you looked them in the eye when they're talking to you. Um,
Yeah.
and so I would
I've
sit
wondered
in.
how many times I thought she was listening to me when she actually might not have been.
Usually, Kat, actually, I would have been listening to you because I think you're always very interesting in what you're saying, to be honest. But I don't know how many university tutorials or whatever I sat through where I was like looking at people in the eye and nodding and just hoping beyond hope that no one would ask me a question and catch out the fact that actually I hadn't been listening at all. Um, so yeah, so those were really the masking. So I don't think I've ever been able to not, you know, I've never really been able to do a good job of controlling impulses around, you know, talking or fidgeting. Like, that's working online is great for me because I can always have something next to me that I'm doodling on or whatever. So I've never been able to mask those. They're always there. So
Yeah.
really it's about managing, for me, it's been about managing, making sure that people, can look beyond those and see what a great, great,
How
great gal I am.
fabulous you are. You are fabulous. But I think it's important. I think there's a couple things in there. I mean, one, I think to recognize that for some individuals, there is no masking that's going to cover that. I think sometimes people think that everyone should be able to develop the skills to kind of just make those things go away, but they're in your brain, so they're not going anywhere. It's how you're wired to be in the world. But also then how much mental effort goes into that masking. And I think, one of the things you talked about is that the importance of that being able to be yourself. And so just reflecting for this group, to recognize that when those young people are in school, they are probably using a huge amount of resource to be in school. And when they come out of school, man, there is nothing left in that tank
mm,
because they've done all that. They've held the eye contact to fool the teacher into thinking that they're listening. They may not have heard anything that was said because they were so busy doing that, and now they're
yeah.
coming back and trying to figure that out. So if a child like your younger self showed up today in school
Mm,
today, what would you want the adults around them to notice or do?
mm. I mean, absolutely the first thing really that comes to, mind for me is around actually that, you know, me reflecting on the responses that I got around being told that what I was doing was not okay. So I was able to see that the way that I was being in the world was frustrating to other people. People were annoyed or angry or whatever. And so, again, that's a shame that becomes internalized. So I think that's the, you know, key thing is to really be able to actually keep those responses, you know, away from the child. It's
Yeah.
it's normal that you will have those responses because it is frustrating. It can be really frustrating when you want something to happen. You need somebody to get their shoes and socks on, and they're climbing a wall somewhere or whatever. That is frustrating, but figuring out how to regulate your own frustration, your own emotions, so that they're not being placed on the child or young person is really key. And then I would say, regardless of whether, a child or young person has a diagnosis or not, if they're struggling with something and you can see that they're struggling with something, be curious about it.
Mm.
So that might be looking at and thinking about and reflecting on, do they always struggle with this thing? Is it just particular times that they struggle with this thing, or is it particular environments that they seem to struggle with? And being creative and thinking outside the box around, well, let's experiment with different ways of doing the thing,
Yeah.
different
Yeah.
times, different spaces, put music on, don't put music on, you know. So just being really open to lots of different ways that things might get done.
Yeah, I think that's so super important. I think one of the things that certainly my experience as a clinician has been is that people are always coming to me looking for what the answer is. What's the thing? What is the thing I can do that's going to stop this person from doing this thing or stop this child from acting in this way? And it's like there is no one answer to those things. It is so much about that constant curiosity. It is so much about like that person in that moment and then
Mm,
experimenting. There's a whole lot of just let's try it and you try something and see whether or not it works or not. Um, when you think
absolutely.
about the supports maybe either like colleagues or friends or you yourself have put in place, what are some of the ones that you think have made the biggest
Mm.
difference? Things that you've like asked for or created?
I mean, that's still very much a work in progress for me. And I have to say, in the workspace, medication has been absolutely essential. That has made, the most significant difference to me. So, and that's not going to be true for everyone, but for me that has been. But being in a workplace and in a having a manager who is open to working in different ways, is open to feedback, saying, please don't cold call me. um, that's never going to work. Let me work to my strengths. Let me be innovative and creative in the way that I do my work. The work will still get done. I might do it slightly differently. And that's, just being able to, to have those little bits of flexibility, and give feedback. But for me, really, probably the biggest difference in my personal, in terms of myself, has been just the process of having a diagnosis and then being able to be constantly reflecting on what is happening for me right now and acknowledging that, understanding it and then being able to go, okay, not giving myself a hard time about it, not having other people give me a hard time about it, and then weighing up, is this something I need to actually change? Do I need to develop some skills or strategies here to manage this better? Or is it actually okay for me to just be this in this space?
Yeah, I think
So there's
that's
that
so
balance
important.
between,
Yeah.
fitting yourself into the space you're in, or
Yeah.
changing the space that you're in to fit your needs. And it's not always going to be completely one or the other. And I
No,
think that's really
100%.
important for children too, because I think a lot of in school environments, we want to fit children in oftentimes. And there's an element of that that is necessary in terms of young people and children just getting through schooling, but there is so much else we can be doing to change the environments.
Yeah. I
So,
think one of the things I've really liked about my space in the positive behavior support world, where I've seen some real changes, a decade ago, we would always be talking about behaviors of concern. A person had a behavior of concern. It's very much about the person. And there's a real shift now to talking about environments of concern and what it is about the environment that is actually eliciting that response from that person, adult, child, whatever, and so, as a practitioner, as a case manager, someone who's supporting a young person, to think about that in the way that we reframe our questions. So when you're going into a space, what is it about the environment? What is the concern in this space that's eliciting that, that may be bringing that out? I also just think, just to kind of, I guess, I just want to say again, I guess the brilliance of what you just said, um, is to see our role in helping to coach that young person to ask those questions you ask of yourself. Is this, what's going on here for me? Is this something that needs to change? Do I need to do something different? Like that empowerment, if you started getting that as a young person in primary school, man, that's a game changer, right? Then you could use that superhero language people talk about in terms of neurodiversity, which otherwise can be
mm,
really frustrating because, sometimes it is and sometimes it's not, right?
that's exactly
Um,
right. Yeah. Yeah.
no, that's really, really good. That's gold, Teresa. Um,
Yeah.
so we've had some conversations about how there have been unexpected links between ADHD and other aspects of your well-being. And we reflected on the fact that there were some questions in the last session that I ran with this group where they asked about, whether there was there any links between people who had ADHD or autism and trauma? Were there any links between that and addiction? Were there any links between that and mental health? And we've kind of gone, well, there's some interesting things to unpack in there. So I just, wherever you feel safe and comfortable, have you kind of seen any of those sort of links for yourself?
100% constant. So I mean, we just have one brain, right? So, you know, I don't have an ADHD brain, or the brain from, any trauma experiences, or the brain from, perimenopause, or the brain from whatever else it is. Like that's just all one brain in there, and one body, and it's all connected. So, um, for me, and there's lots of research and evidence to show that there are, lots and lots of, interconnections, symptom overlaps with, between ADHD, and trauma, between ADHD, trauma, and anxiety and depression. And all of those things are 100% true for me. And in particular, I think, with women, although not exclusively with women, but, there has been a history of misdiagnosis, of depression and anxiety, among women with ADHD. And there's obviously a clear link between trauma, um, and depression and anxiety symptoms. And there
Yeah,
is also a clear link between ADHD and trauma, as we've discussed, whether it's chicken or egg. So, there's lots and lots of, evidence
yeah,
to say that actually growing up, with an undiagnosed or diagnosed, neurodevelopmental condition is a traumatic experience in itself. Um, so it's impossible to completely unpack what's what.
Do
Um,
you, do you think it's a useful thing for you as a person to try to reflect on that at all, or do you feel it's more useful for you to just kind of think about, well, what's my brain doing now? Like,
um, I've done a lot of reflecting on it. I absolutely have, and I continue to. But yeah, what I find more useful is just, yeah, what's my response right now? What am I struggling with?
yeah,
Um, it doesn't have to, I don't actually have to get to the bottom of why I am doing it, what's triggering that response. The response is happening. What matters now is how I manage it,
Yeah. I,
and how the rest of the world around me kind of responds to it as well. So, um, I mean, the other thing I think it's probably important to note, and obviously, we're talking about children and young people primarily here, but there are lots of links with ADHD and hormonal changes, particularly for women. Estrogen supports dopamine. And so for a lot of women, and this was certainly true for me, when you hit perimenopause, things just get a whole lot more unmanageable. I've had periods of my life where I've been so completely at ease and at peace with who I am and able to just be amazing in the world. And, I've had jobs where I've had lots of dynamic stuff and novelty in the work. And then I've had periods of my life where I've just gone crashed and burned because, whether it's hormonal, whether it's the environment, job situation I'm in is not meeting my needs. So, um, it's not a static experience. It fluctuates. It fluctuates based on all those other mental health and other bodily kind of input.
yeah, I mean that hormonal connection is a really interesting one, and I think for everyone who's here supporting a adolescent and thinking about all the significant hormonal changes that happen then. I mean, I can tell you as a woman like Teresa, who's gone through that fun ride of menopause, perimenopause, man, it is worse than puberty. Okay, like similar sort of thing going on there. So asking those questions, I think. Really asking what that might mean for that young person if they're not getting that, or getting suddenly more dopamine or getting less dopamine,
Mm.
depending on how those hormones are fluctuating for them is really important. And I guess also just reflecting back on some of the questions the group have asked before, to hold lightly the importance of all those different things that are happening for a person, right? Yes, they may have these different diagnoses. Yes, they may have had trauma experiences. And I'm going to argue that actually just listening to how Teresa has expressed her journey through school, there probably isn't a young person who is neurodivergent who hasn't had some experience of trauma, in the sense of that cumulative experience of never quite being right. That in itself is traumatic, particularly for a young person who's so desperate to fit in. So I think we can kind of make some assumptions of that way rather than just like the kind of the big T trauma. Um, Nicole's just shared it's a fun challenge being a menopausal parent of a 15-year-old male with ADHD and ASD. And girl, we hear you 100%. But I do think that's really interesting about how that plays out for adults. And I'm going to warn my
Mm.
sister-in-law who's got ADHD and is about to hit that stage
And
to think about
interestingly,
that.
in terms of my mother, is not diagnosed, but I very strongly believe she has ADHD, and she was going through menopause when I was a teenager, and so I absolutely, it was the only time in our relationship really where we really actually really hated each other and did not do well together at all.
Yeah.
So,
And I think that, again, if you're supporting families where, we actually know, I may not get the stat right, but I read recently that ADHD is the second most inheritable condition after heart disease. So like the likelihood is if you're supporting a child or young person who has ADHD, their parents may not know, but there's a really good chance that one of them is also has ADHD. And so that actually impacts how you work with that whole family system, right? And I think that's really important to be thinking about. Before we open the floor for questions, which I'll do shortly after this, if you could leave the people who are listening today with just one takeaway about supporting a young person with ADHD, what would it be?
look, I really think it's going back to what I said before around checking your own responses, and really avoiding kind of any reactions and responses that shame or criticize, as Fee has just put in the chat, the young person, and just maintaining that curiosity. Um, just on that previous point, Kat, around the inheritability, and something that I thought about when I was, co-parenting a small child with autism and ADHD. Co-regulation is often a really important thing for children in that space. And as a person who was living with that without knowing myself, I wasn't able to co-regulate with that child. It just wasn't possible. So somebody else had to step in and do that. And so I think that is a really, for those of us in the room who are in that space, who may have, be living with ADHD or autism or whatever, and being that support, thinking about ways that you can manage that. Um, and I mean, that's important for everyone, really, because if
Yeah.
you're heightened, because you're frustrated or angry or whatever, you're probably not in a space to be co-regulating anyway.
No, because
um,
then you become part of
so
that environment of concern.
exactly, exactly. So I think that's the thing. I think it really is about taking that step back, to allow yourself to process, responses, think a little bit more broadly around what's going on and how important it is and how we can be curious and creative about finding different ways to work with and support children to get through their day.
Yeah, yeah, to get through their day as in one piece as you can be, right? I
Yeah,
think that's really
yeah.
important. I think, one of the things I guess I'd say also to remember our role when we're in that kind of supportive role is how important it is we're advocates for these young people. Like that we tell this story, that we talk about as Fee said, the 10,000 criticisms a
Mm,
young person with ADHD may have experienced, just how often they get told something they're doing is
mm,
not quite right and what impact that has. So I think we have a
mm.
we have a responsibility to kind of keep framing that and reshaping that conversation. Um, so we have had a question come in, a couple of questions come in. So the first one is, did you notice your food intake changed, your condition at any time? Have you ever monitored the food that you're taking or had any impact from that,
Um,
Teresa?
Look, I think for me, I've noticed there's a couple of sides to that. I think historically there has definitely been, eating as a dopamine, boost. Just, and also like, ingesting substances like ridiculous amounts of coffee in my 20s that, was probably a bit of self-medicating. Um, but food, like food and sleep, are two things that are really important for me to manage in terms of being well. So I know I can guarantee you if I have a poor night's sleep, I'm going to have a really, really crap day the next day. Um, and
Yeah.
and same goes with food. If I don't, maintain a regular intake, and
Well,
generally I don't follow diets because I can't. I just don't do routines of any description. um, but I
plenty
do
of strengths.
try to limit, things like sugar and things like that. Try to kind of limit foods that give that kind of more crazy, roller coaster in terms of your brain
Jerome wants to know
responses.
how
So,
much coffee is too much. He's just asking for a friend.
oh man, I was probably having like up to 8 or 10 cups a day, for many, 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 many years. I only have 1 cup a day now. The cat looks like she's frozen there. Um, so
She does look a little bit frozen. I'm sure she'll come back to us. But in the meantime, maybe if people have got a question for Teresa, either put in chat or come off mute
yeah.
and ask the
There is
question.
well something I just
Yeah.
wanted to say something else in kind of in response to Fee's comment about the 10,000 criticisms and how that gets internalized. Um, and I heard somebody use the term tiny moments of shame, like hundreds of tiny moments of shame. And that's a thing that I, actively still manage on a day-to-day basis is that, you spend so much of your life having internalized all those criticisms. When you walk around your house and you see the laundry you haven't put away, or the bill you haven't paid, or the suitcase that's still sitting out even though you came back from your work trip 5 weeks ago, or the whatever. And every time you see something like that, there's a thought that says, oh, why haven't you done that?
Yeah.
It's not hard. Like, why haven't you done that? Um, and having to really, so that, those criticisms get fully absorbed and become part of, a person's internal narrative. And really, it is a huge struggle to try and shut that up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just I know my brother, who's also has an ADHD diagnosis, he's talked hugely about that, about how much of his work as an adult has been unpacking all those messages he got as a young person. So, you know, we're working at the front end, guys. Like we're at that stage where we can stop that, or at least try to mitigate that, So some of it might be about just, man, making sure you are keeping the other direction, right? Really piling on the things that are unique and special and fabulous about them in a genuine way, but in a genuine way. Are there
Mm.
ways, Teresa, where you feel like your ADHD does help you? Like, are there things about it that you're like, that's been useful, or is it mostly like, no, man, I'm just managing it?
Oh, look, I think there's definitely stuff. I think most of the things have a flip side.
Yeah.
So, like, if I'm interested in something, like if I find something, fascinating or whatever, I can learn and I can work super, super quickly, sometimes too quickly. Um, and not pay attention to the detail. But it's really great. Like in my personal life, I do so much DIY because I'm just like, oh, there's a thing I want to do. I'm just going to Google the bejesus out of it and learn how to do it. And and then sometimes I will actually follow it through. Other times I will Google the bejesus out of it and then be like, oh, I can't actually do it now because I've just lost interest. I've Googled it too much. Um, so I have I have 6,000 half finished projects around my house. I have cupboards full of things that have been you know, a hobby that I've taken up and, been obsessed by for 6 months and then left. But, I don't, it's fun. Like I actually really enjoy learning things. And if I don't ever do it again, I think that's also okay.
Yeah, because it
Um,
was the learning of it in itself that was the
yeah,
joy,
that's
right?
right. That's right. And
Um,
that's, yeah, yeah. I mean, I think we all, we're all lifelong learners, but, I think for me, it's like I'm driven to do it. Yeah. I think the other things that I notice, and whether they're, again, personality, whether they're ADHD, whether they're other things, tend to be quite good in crisis situations. Like even though I don't like being cold called or, having to change tack, really quickly for some reason in a crisis, I can just get in there and deal with stuff.
I'll
Um,
remember that, filing it away.
Thanks, Kat. um, I'm good at I'm the go-to person amongst lots of my friends in terms of like finding bits of information. I have one friend who just regularly calls me the Oracle because if I don't know something, she can they can guarantee that like I'll be the one friend who'll go, I don't know, but I'll find out.
You're on it, and down that Googling rabbit hole.
Yeah. It's like, don't other people have Google? Like,
Just not the intensity in
so
terms of the willingness to focus.
I mean
There's
the
a
other,
question
yeah,
in the chat that asks, going back to the conversation we were having about the
yeah,
impact of shame and criticism.
yeah.
Do you think for a young person, removing them from that school context and putting them in a homeschooling situation might be is that an option? Do you feel like what do you think about that?
Um, I think that's a really interesting question, and actually, that's something that my then partner and I were exploring with her child. Um, Honestly, I think it depends on the child and depends on the school. There are some amazing schools out there who really work very hard to support children, in that space. And my personal opinion would be that if that's the case, then there's benefit in staying with that because and this is where the balance between, fitting into the environment or making the environment fit a person, or just removing, separating the two completely is a delicate balance. So we do have to, we all, regardless of who we are or what particular things we come with, have to fit into spaces in our lives that may not actually be spaces that we love, or that we work well in. We all do it. We all have to do it. So there's benefit in figuring out ways to be in those spaces and manage it. But if it's harmful, if the school is not coming to the party with being able to actually support that child in ways that they need to be supported, then that's harmful, and there's no benefit for them, or it's potentially detrimental for them to be there.
Harmful, that's right.
So
I think, and that goes back to another question that I was asking, what do you do when they're not providing enough support? And I guess, some of this is, we've talked about this before, there are really fantastic schools out there. We also know there are a lot of schools that are so stretched right now, and teachers are genuinely stretched right now. Like, we have to remember to hold that with compassion too, right? That they may not be able to do what that young person needs. And that's also okay, because that's about what their capability and limit and capacity is, right? So you are holding that balance then in your roles to go, okay, if this is as far as they can go right now, what's the possible negative impact on the child, right? What's it going to be like for them to stay in this room for this year? What's it going to be like for them to stay at the school for this in an ongoing way? How close are they to the end of the period? How is that balanced with friendship groups, if they have them or don't have them, right? Like, I can think of, and in weighing that, make the decision of, do we homeschool for a period of time, a short period of time or a longer period of time? Depends. Do we start actively looking for another school to transition to, saying that, okay, this may be great, but we're going to look for someplace else, at the term of the year, a term of a term. And I think, really talking then openly with the school about, we're now starting to consider these options because you're not able to accommodate these needs, so that they understand how serious you are about them. This is not just it would be nice, but actually, if you can't do this, we're going to have to go. I think that's really important. I just want to jump back to the food thing, because I know that comes up. And I think it's one of those things that's tricky, because the research on it is, at the moment, it's a very fast moving space. It's a place where they've not been able to do, and this is the biggest challenge, there's not been able to be any large scale, clinically controlled, randomized trials, right? It's too hard to get a large group of people and have some of them getting a treatment and some of them not, to be able to make. So really, we have lots of anecdotal evidence. What I would say is that there's enough anecdotal evidence to say that for some people, for a small percentage of people, there are certain food changes that make a difference. I've seen it. I've experienced it. I've watched that happen for a couple of people that I support. But I have equally watched people who have had decades of incredibly restricted diets because of a belief from a family member or others that that's going to make the difference. And that actually is one of the biggest sources of the behaviors of challenge, because they are so frustrated about their inability to get the things that they really want to have. So it's like everything else, you got to weigh it up. And I would say you only go down the food route when you have tried every other strategy. Because that's such a significant thing that you're playing with. You're playing with biochemistry. And if you don't know exactly what you're doing there, that's a little bit more problematic. I think people think of it as a simple fix, but it's not really a simple fix. And to do it well, it's actually very complicated. To do like a full stripped down reintroduction diet to understand what's going on. Anyways, soapbox moment, just had to have one. That happens every once in a while. Looking to see what other questions we've had pop in here. So there is one question that's calling out my use of the term rabbit holes. Apologies, Shell. And what do you do when someone uses words which are non-contextual? Well, you do just what you did. You call it out, right? And I think actually that's how you change culture, right? And I know that I use metaphor in circumstances. I'm not insulted remotely if I say something that people don't understand or doesn't make sense. So that was about going down an area of interest, and so that you keep looking at different things as they pop up, like on the internet, as one thing after another comes up. That's the rabbit hole, right? But I think here at Life Without Barriers, I saw there was a shout out before to Ash and the Dawn team. Like, they're brilliant. We're really lucky that we do have an organization that's genuinely trying to figure out how to do this well. I think Teresa and I have talked about it. We don't do it well yet, because we have a very particular way of operating, and that very particular of operating feels good for a certain type of person, right? But that doesn't mean we do have the space that enables the challenge of that. So ask the questions, put your hand up, say what to say. Don't cold call me. Give me warning, let me know what you're talking about, etc. I think that's how you change culture. There any other questions? I think.
I have a question. Sorry, I was just thinking, how do you talk to a child who you're starting to go down this process of, you think there's a diagnosis? How do we say, we think this might suit you, but how do we,
How do you actually start that conversation with the child and explain it? Like, just say, we're gonna start talking with you about this, or talking to other people about this thing. How old's the child?
9?
Yeah. I mean, Kat, I'd be interested in your, thoughts on this. I mean, my reflection would be that, there's conversations around how, everyone is a little bit different. And everyone, and we all have, like, differences that, like, different colored eyes and all those things. And then some of us have, brains that work in slightly different ways.
Colored brains.
Yeah. And you can't see a different colored brain easily like you can different colored eyes. So sometimes there's some special tests that, you got to do to figure out whether, what color your brain is. And it's important to know that, or we think it's important to know that, because, knowing that will help us to be able to put some, things in place to make life easier for you. I mean, and I guess it's about acknowledging if the child themselves feels, understands or acknowledges that they are struggling with something. That's the first conversation, really, is to go, are you having a hard time with that? Like, are those things difficult for you? Like, what do you think that's about? Here's some thinking that, some ideas that we've heard, or I don't know, Kat.
I can foresee the challenge coming back from this particular child is around, well, then why don't you love me the way I am? Why are you trying to change, you love me whatever color eyes I have, why are you trying to change the color of my brain?
I think I'd be making it really clear that you're not trying to change the color of the brain. You're just trying to see what color it is.
Yeah. And help
I think,
change some of the things around it.
That's right. I think a lot of it, I guess it's a couple things I often talk about when I'm talking. I assume by the time a kid is 9, they've already switched on to the fact that they're different. That happens a whole lot earlier than we think they do. They see that they respond to things and think about things, et cetera, differently than their mates. They may not know what that difference is, but they know. So some of this is just about actually helping them start getting language to describe the things which are different. But I often then just talk about the fact that the world is mostly built. If we continue with the metaphor of colored brains, I hope that's okay for people there. But if we assume that the world is mostly built for a particular type of way of being, right, then what we're wanting to do is give that child the language to be able to describe what it is that they need to be in the world. It is about empowering them to talk about their brain and empowering them to help them understand how it is that they best operate, right? And that's often it's talking about empowerment and giving language so that you can ask. It's the same thing, like if I've had a conversation with a friend very recently who's wondering, why would I get diagnosed in my 50s? And I said, not necessarily for yourself, but so that you have language that you feel comfortable using, like you can work through the process, A, so you can understand yourself a bit more, and that's always useful, but B, so that you can talk to other people about what might be going on for you. There was a question about binge eating, and whether or not there's a link between binge eating and ADHD. And I think that, or ASD, I think the thing that, as Teresa talked about earlier, there is absolutely a very strong link between dopamine and ADHD. We know that people with ADHD do tend to seek dopamine hits more in different ways. And as a result, you will see risk-taking behaviors. But you can see addiction is more likely, like I talked about in the last time, but also absolutely things like binge eating, right? All these things and there's some impulse in that as well, right? So is it going to be something you see in everybody with ADHD? Absolutely not. Could it be a manifestation of a young person's ADHD? Possibly. And it's like with anybody, when you'd see that, like, what's it mean for that person, right? Are they doing it as a way for comfort? Are they doing it to escape? Are they doing it because it feels good and they like that feeling? Who knows? But unpacking that in a curious way, in a non-judgment way. As soon as they start knowing that you're not happy with the way that they're eating, they're going to clamp down and not tell you what's going on for them inside.
Teresa, I don't want to stop this conversation, but I am just conscious that we are
we got 2 minutes left.
Yeah,
2 minutes.
We are really at time. It has been such a rich conversation, as we knew that it would be. We're so appreciative of your generosity in both your time and in your sharing of story and experience. It has just been a wonderful hour and it has gone so incredibly quickly. Teresa, I think you had one more thing that you wanted to say, so I'll stop talking, and if you guys have just got a final thing you'd like to say, and then we'll call it quits.
I just wanted to comment on there's a comment around helping the child see their neurodivergent brain as a strength and not a deficit, and I think that's absolutely valuable point. I guess the only side I would say to that is that it's a balance between understanding. So for me, when people talk about having a neurospicy brain being a superpower, that actually just makes me go, actually no, it minimizes what I'm struggling with. So I think so long as that's that absolutely are strengths, but so long as that's balanced with acknowledging that
Genuine challenge.
There's struggles that aren't necessarily their fault, but a part of trying to navigate this ridiculously inflexible world we have.
Excellent. I have nothing further to add to that. We'll just stop with
Well, thank you so much.
so much for having us.
Thank you.
Oh, it's such a pleasure, and I'm sure that there will be further invites into the future. As always, it has been an absolute delight. So many positive comments and thank yous coming through in the chat now. Thanks, everybody, for your participation. Have a great rest of your Wednesday.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.